"Leave us," my daughter-in-law screamed, her finger pointing violently at the front door. "We want you out of this house today." I looked at my son, who stared silently at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. My heart broke, so I packed my bags and gave up my beloved home for their peace. I walked away with tears in my eyes, leaving them the house, but they had no idea I was secretly taking a multi-million-dollar inheritance with me. The sound of Jessica slamming her coffee mug onto the granite counter echoed loudly through the kitchen. "Leave us!" she screamed, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of respect. "We want you out of this house today." I stood by the kitchen island, a damp dish towel still in my hands. The bright morning sun streamed through the large bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the dark red flush of anger creeping up Jessica's neck. I turned my gaze to Brad. My son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love, patience, and financial support. I had sat motionless on the wooden bar stool. He stared down at the intricate patterns of the oak floorboards. He did not look up. He did not speak. He simply refused to defend his mother. The silence in the room was heavier than Jessica's shouting. "I am 64 years old. I am a retired accountant who spent 4 decades building a stable, beautiful, and secure life. My late husband and I built this house from the ground up, paying for every brick and every hardwood plank with our own sweat and savings. Now my own daughter-in-law was treating me like a trespassing stranger in my own kitchen. You are stifling our marriage," Jessica continued, pacing back and forth across the expensive tile floor. "Every single time I turn around, you are here. This is our time. Brad and I need to start our lives as the true heads of this household. We cannot do that with you hovering over us, managing the kitchen, talking to the neighbors, and acting like you own the place." I felt a hot, painful lump form in my throat. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring my vision of the pristine kitchen I had designed with my husband. She felt stifled. She felt stifled in a $1.2 million suburban home located in one of the most prestigious residential neighborhoods in the entire state. A home where she lived completely rent-free. When Brad married Jessica 2 years ago, I welcomed her into this family with open arms and an open checkbook. When they struggled to afford a cramped apartment downtown, I opened my doors. I gave them the entire east wing of the house. I paid for the utilities. I paid for the premium groceries. I paid the exorbitant property taxes. I wanted them to have a massive financial head start in life. Instead, my generosity had bred a monstrous and toxic entitlement. "You need to pack your bags immediately," Jessica demanded, crossing her arms tightly over her chest and glaring at me. "I am done sharing a roof with my husband's mother. We want our privacy and we want our space to grow. Today, Helen. I want you gone today. I will not spend another night in a house where I feel like a guest." I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the bitter reality of the situation. I let the warm tears fall down my cheeks. I did not cry out of weakness. I cried out of a profound, shattering grief. I was mourning the son I thought I had raised. Brad finally shifted his weight on the stool, but he still kept his eyes firmly glued to his leather shoes. He was a coward, completely paralyzed by his wife's aggressive ambition and his own lack of spine. At 64, after a long career in accounting, I had seen enough balance sheets to know when an investment was completely bankrupt. Trying to salvage this toxic relationship was a lost cause. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand. I folded the dish towel neatly and placed it on the counter. "If that is what you want," I said quietly. My voice did not shake. I did not yell back. I did not demand gratitude or remind them of the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their comfortable lives. I just looked at Brad one last time, praying he would look up and stop this madness. He did not. I turned around and walked up the wide, carpeted stairs to my master bedroom. I pulled my hard-shell suitcase from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. I did not pack everything. I only packed the absolute essentials. My clothes, my jewelry, my personal financial documents, and the framed photograph of my late husband that sat on my nightstand. The rest of the furniture, the imported antique rugs, the expensive art hanging on the walls, I left it all exactly where it was. It took me less than 45 minutes to pack up my entire existence in that massive house. I zipped the heavy suitcase closed. The heavy thud of the wheels rolling across the hardwood floor echoed through the quiet upstairs hallway. I walked back downstairs, my posture straight, and my face entirely blank. Jessica and Brad were still in the kitchen. Jessica was practically vibrating with excitement, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She thought she had won. I walked over to the kitchen island. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out my heavy brass keyring, and detached the front door key. I placed it gently on the cool granite countertop. It made a sharp, definitive clink that rang through the silent room. "Goodbye, Brad," I said softly. I turned my back on them, pulled my suitcase out the heavy mahogany front door, and let it click shut firmly behind me. Inside, Jessica thought she had just won the ultimate prize. She thought she had successfully bullied a grieving widow out of a $1.2 million luxury estate. She firmly believed she was now a wealthy homeowner. What she did not realize was that I was the only thing keeping that household afloat, and she had just made the most expensive mistake of her miserable life. I shifted my silver sedan into drive and pressed my foot lightly on the gas pedal. In the rearview mirror, I watched the manicured front lawn and the vibrant pink rose bushes I had meticulously tended for over 20 years grow smaller and smaller. I had planted every single one of those roses by hand with my late husband. Now I was leaving them behind. But the moment my car turned the corner and the large brick house disappeared from my sight, something inside me completely shifted. The hot tears that had been streaming down my face abruptly stopped. I reached over to the passenger seat, grabbed a dry tissue from my leather handbag, and wiped my cheeks clean. I took a deep breath of the cool air conditioning blowing from the dashboard vents. The overwhelming, crushing sadness of a heartbroken mother vanished. It was instantly replaced by the cold, calculated and pragmatic resolve of a veteran accountant. I had spent 40 years of my life balancing books, auditing massive corporate accounts, and identifying bad investments. For the last 2 years, I had treated my son and his wife as an investment in family. But Jessica had just declared bankruptcy on our relationship, and Brad had silently co-signed it. It was time to close the ledger. I did not drive to a cheap roadside motel. I did not drive to a friend's house to cry over a cup of tea. I merged onto the highway and drove straight toward the towering glass and steel buildings of the downtown financial district. My destination was the plush, quiet office of my estate attorney, Thomas Reynolds. Thomas had been my husband's closest friend and our trusted legal advisor for decades. When my husband passed away after a brief but fierce battle with illness, Thomas had been the one to guide me through the complicated maze of grief and legal paperwork. I pulled my sedan into the underground parking garage, took the private elevator up to the 32nd floor, and walked past the heavy glass doors of the law firm. The receptionist recognized me instantly and ushered me straight into Thomas's corner office. He stood up from behind his massive oak desk, a look of mild surprise crossing his face. "Helen," he said warmly, offering me a seat in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. "I was just about to call you this afternoon. I have some excellent news regarding the estate. The probate process has officially cleared as of this morning." I sat down and crossed my legs, resting my handbag in my lap. "I know, Thomas," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "That is exactly why I am here. We need to execute the final transfers immediately, and we need to make a significant change to the property deed." Thomas opened a thick manila folder on his desk. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and looked over the documents. As we discussed last month, he began the total liquid assets from the investment portfolios, the life insurance payouts, and the offshore cash reserves have been fully aggregated. The final cleared amount is $2.8 million. $2.8 million in pure, unencumbered liquid cash. When my husband was alive, we lived a very comfortable but incredibly modest lifestyle. We never flaunted our wealth. Brad knew we were financially secure, but he and Jessica had absolutely no idea about the true sheer magnitude of the estate. They assumed the $1.2 million house was the absolute peak of our net worth. They thought by kicking me out of the physical property, they were claiming the ultimate prize. They were so incredibly wrong. I want every single penny of that $2.8 million transferred into a new private trust account, I instructed Thomas. The new account must be solely in my name. I want Brad completely removed as a secondary beneficiary on all liquid assets immediately. Thomas frowned slightly, setting his pen down. Helen, are you absolutely sure about this? You always intended to leave a safety net for Brad and Jessica. Jessica just threw me out of my own home, I stated plainly. Watching Thomas's eyes widen in absolute shock. She screamed at me to pack my bags and leave so they could be the true heads of the household. And Brad sat there and let her do it. They do not want my presence, Thomas. Therefore, they no longer get my protection. Thomas leaned back in his chair, processing the brutal reality of my words. He was a smart man. He did not offer useless platitudes or tell me to calm down. He simply nodded, picked up his pen, and began drafting the authorization forms. There is one more thing, I said, leaning forward slightly. I want you to draft a quitclaim deed for the house. Today, right now. I want to legally and permanently transfer the entire title of the suburban property over to Brad and Jessica. Thomas stopped writing. He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. Helen, that house is worth over $1 million. If you're cutting them off financially, why on earth would you just hand them the deed to a luxury estate? I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, precise smile of an accountant who had just spotted a fatal flaw in a competitor's business plan. Because Thomas, a luxury estate is not an asset if you do not have the cash flow to maintain it. It is a massive, suffocating liability. The property taxes alone are nearly $20,000 a year. The premium homeowners insurance is exorbitant. The neighborhood homeowners association fees are astronomical. For 2 years, I have paid every single bill while they lived there completely rent-free. They think the house is a free ride. I want to give them exactly what they asked for. I want them to own it, completely and utterly. Thomas stared at me for a long moment before a slow, understanding smirk spread across his face. He recognized the brilliance of the trap. By legally transferring the deed, I was stripping away my legal obligation to pay a single dime toward the upkeep of that massive property. I was handing them a beautiful sinking ship. I will have the quitclaim deed drawn up in 15 minutes. Thomas said, his fingers flying across his computer keyboard. We will file it with the county clerk before the end of the business day. I sat in the quiet, air-conditioned office and signed document after document. My signature was crisp and unwavering. With every stroke of my pen, I secured my $2.8 million inheritance into an impenetrable financial fortress. And with the final stroke, I signed away the house. By demanding I leave the property, Jessica thought she was taking control. Instead, she had unwittingly severed her and my son from a multi-million cash empire. They were now the proud owners of a financial black hole, and they had absolutely no idea the storm that was about to hit them. Jessica did not waste a single second. I had barely signed the final trust documents in Thomas's office before she started rearranging the reality of my former home. Within 48 hours of my departure, she moved her brother Todd into the house. Todd was a 32-year-old chronically unemployed grifter who had spent his entire adult life bouncing between friends' couches and failed get-rich-quick schemes. He did not own a car. He did not have a savings account. And now, thanks to my spineless son and his ambitious wife, Todd was moving his duffel bags straight into my former master suite, the very same room where my husband and I had spent 30 years of our marriage, the room where we had shared our deepest secrets and built our life together, was now occupied by a man who considered waking up before noon a supreme physical hardship. They did not just move him in quietly. They decided to celebrate their newly acquired empire by throwing a massive, loud party on a Tuesday night. I did not need to be there to know exactly what was happening. I knew Jessica perfectly. She invited her loud friends, her obnoxious cousins, and every single person she wanted to impress with her new status as the queen of the manor. They dragged cases of cheap beer across the antique oak hardwood floors, leaving deep, permanent scuff marks on the delicate wood I used to polish by hand every single Sunday. They turned up the bass on the living room stereo until the custom glass windows rattled violently in their frames. They treated my meticulously curated luxury home like a cheap frat house. Brad, as always, did absolutely nothing to stop it. He probably stood in the corner of his own kitchen, nursing a single beer completely overshadowed by his wife's dominating presence and her brother's obnoxious laughter. He had traded a loving mother for a house full of leeches. The next morning, my phone buzzed loudly on the glass patio table. I was sitting on the private balcony of my newly leased luxury condo. It was located in a pristine, highly exclusive 55 and older community on the other side of the city. The air here was quiet, filled only with the gentle sound of the community water fountains and the soft chirping of local birds. The condo was absolutely stunning, featuring sleek modern appliances, massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and zero maintenance responsibilities. It was the perfect sanctuary for a wealthy widow who no longer had to tolerate the draining presence of ungrateful children. I picked up my phone and saw a text message notification from Jessica. I opened the message. It was a photograph. The picture showed Todd, sprawled out comfortably in my former living room. He was wearing dirty, mud-stained sneakers, and his feet were kicked up aggressively, right in the center of my expensive, custom-ordered Italian leather sofa. He was holding a half-empty beer bottle and flashing a smug, arrogant grin directly at the camera. Beneath the photo, Jessica had typed a vicious little caption. The caption read, "The boys are finally getting comfortable in their new castle. Hope you're enjoying your little retirement apartment." She sent it specifically to hurt me. She sent it to prove that she had conquered my space, that she had successfully erased my legacy from that beautiful house, and that she had replaced me with her worthless brother. She wanted me to feel small, defeated, and humiliated. She wanted a reaction. She expected me to call her in tears, screaming about the disrespect to my expensive furniture and the invasion of my privacy. I did not cry. I did not feel a single ounce of anger or betrayal. I looked at the photograph of Todd ruining my beautiful leather sofa, and I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. That sofa was no longer my problem. That scuffed hardwood floor was no longer my responsibility. I tapped the screen of my phone, went into my contacts list, and permanently blocked Todd's phone number. Then, just to ensure my absolute peace of mind, I blocked Jessica's number as well. I did not need their toxic arrogance poisoning my beautiful morning. I set the phone down on the patio table and opened my silver laptop. The bright morning sun warmed my shoulders as I logged securely into my private banking portal. Today was the 28th of the month. It was the exact time of the month I always dedicated to managing the massive household finances. For 2 years, I had dutifully paid every single expense to keep that large suburban estate running perfectly. I navigated straight to the automatic payments tab on the bank website. The screen loaded quickly, displaying a long, expensive list of hefty financial obligations. I clicked on the exorbitant monthly property tax escrow payment. Cancel. I clicked on the premium comprehensive homeowners insurance policy that protected the massive structure and all its expensive contents. Cancel. I scrolled down to the Neighborhood Homeowners Association fee, which was over $500 a month, just to maintain the gated entry and the lush community landscaping. Cancel. I methodically deleted every single recurring payment associated with that property. I wiped the slate completely clean. The bank confirmed the cancellations one by one with a satisfying green checkmark on the screen. The total monthly overhead for that luxury house was nearly $4,000. And as of this exact moment, Brad and Jessica were entirely on the hook for every single penny. They wanted to be the true heads of the household. They wanted to live in a grand castle without my interference. Now they were going to have to pay the royal tax. I closed my laptop, picked up my cup of black coffee, and took a slow, deeply satisfying sip. The trap was perfectly set. The financial safety net was completely gone, and the first of the month was only 3 days away. The first day of the month arrived with bright, mocking sunshine pouring through the bay windows of my former home. Inside, the atmosphere was a chaotic mess of empty bottles and unwashed dishes left over from Todd's celebrations. Jessica sat at the granite kitchen island, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and scrolling mindlessly through her phone. The mail carrier walked up the long concrete driveway and dropped a thick stack of envelopes into the brass mailbox. Brad, wearing wrinkled pajamas, shuffled out to the porch to retrieve it. He dumped the pile of letters onto the kitchen counter. Most of it was junk, but 2 official-looking envelopes stood out immediately. They bore the crisp, formal seals of the county tax assessor and the Neighborhood Homeowners Association. Jessica reached over and tore open the county envelope first. She unfolded the thick white paper. It was the quarterly property tax bill, a massive sum that usually went directly to my secure escrow account. Jessica stared at the bold printed numbers at the bottom of the page. She did not panic. She did not even look concerned. Instead, she let out a loud, dramatic scoff. She tossed the heavy tax bill across the counter toward Brad. She then opened the second envelope from the Homeowners Association. It was a penalty notice citing a severe noise violation from their loud party earlier in the week, accompanied by a hefty fine and a demand for the standard monthly maintenance dues. Jessica rolled her eyes in profound annoyance. She assumed this was simply a clerical error. In her arrogant mind, she firmly believed I was still sitting in some depressing apartment dutifully managing the administrative chores of her life. She looked at Brad, irritated by the slight inconvenience. "Call your mother," she ordered sharply. "Tell her the bank messed up her automatic payments. Tell her she needs to call the county and fix this immediately before they charge us a late fee. I do not have time to deal with her administrative mistakes today." Brad picked up the papers. He looked at the massive total at the bottom of the tax bill and felt a tiny flicker of unease in his chest, but quickly pushed it down. He was so used to my subservient bailouts. For his entire adult life, whenever a financial problem arose, he simply handed it to me and walked away. He picked up his cell phone and dialed my number. I was sitting on the private balcony of my luxury condo, enjoying a perfectly toasted bagel and reading the morning Financial Times. When my phone screen lit up with Brad's name, I did not ignore it. I wanted to hear this. I swiped the screen and answered the call. "Hello, Brad," I said. My voice was completely calm, smooth, and entirely unbothered. "Mum." Brad started, his tone a mix of lazy entitlement and slight annoyance. "You need to call your bank right now. We just got the mail and the county sent the property tax bill directly to the house. The Homeowners Association also sent their monthly invoice with a stupid penalty fee on it. You forgot to update your payment portal when you moved out. You need to pay these right now before the late fees kick in. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. I looked out over the pristine landscaping of my new community. I let a long silence stretch over the phone line. Brad shifted uncomfortably on the other end, waiting for my usual panicked apology. He waited for me to assure him I would handle everything. That apology never came. Brad, I said clearly, enunciating every single syllable so there could be absolutely no misunderstanding. I do not pay taxes on property I no longer inhabit. I do not pay homeowners association fees for a neighborhood I no longer live in. You and Jessica wanted that house. You demanded that I leave so you could be the true heads of the household. Therefore, you handle the overhead. My financial obligations to that property ended the exact minute I walked out the front door. Brad froze. The blood drained from his face. But Mum, he stammered, his voice pitching up in genuine panic. The combined total for these bills is nearly $4,000. We do not have $4,000 sitting in our checking account. You know we do not have that kind of money. Jessica just bought new furniture for the guest room, and Todd has not found a job yet. You cannot just leave us completely stranded like this. It is your house. I smiled softly, though he could not see it. It is your house now, Brad. I replied coldly. Good luck with the bills. I pressed the red button on my screen and ended the call. I set the phone down and went back to my newspaper, entirely unaffected by his crisis. Back in the chaotic kitchen, Brad dropped his phone onto the counter. His hands began to shake slightly. He looked at the massive tax bill, the Homeowners Association fine, and the looming reality of the premium home insurance and utility bills that were inevitably going to follow. The combined monthly upkeep for the luxury estate was nearly $4,000, and they were completely broke. Panic began to set in. He looked over at his wife in sheer terror. Jessica saw the panic on his face and let out an exasperated sigh. She stood up, walked around the kitchen island, and patted him condescendingly on the shoulder. She told him not to worry. She told him to stop acting like a frightened child. She confidently assured him my refusal to pay was just a petty, pathetic temper tantrum. Jessica smiled her smug, arrogant smile. She looked at Brad and told him they would simply go to the bank downtown tomorrow morning. She firmly believed his late father had left behind a massive family trust fund, a bottomless pool of wealth I had been secretly managing. She assumed since they now owned the family estate, they automatically had full legal access to the family cash. They had absolutely no idea the vault was completely empty. The following morning, the bright sun did absolutely nothing to warm the cold panic settling in Brad's chest. Despite Jessica's confident assurances, he felt a nagging sense of dread as he drove toward the downtown financial district. He parked his car in the secure garage of the regional bank branch where our family had conducted all of our primary business for over 2 decades. This was the institution where my late husband and I had painstakingly built our financial foundation. For 20 years, we had maintained premium accounts, robust investment portfolios, and an immaculate credit history. Brad knew this. He had grown up watching us manage our wealth from this exact building. He walked through the heavy revolving glass doors and stepped onto the polished marble floor of the expansive lobby. He was trying his absolute best to project the image of a wealthy, established homeowner. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and carried his leather folio containing the massive property tax bill and the Homeowners Association penalty notice. Jessica had spent the entire morning pumping his ego full of arrogant confidence. She had firmly convinced him that because he was the only son, and because he was now the undisputed master of the physical family estate, he was naturally entitled to the family cash. She assured him there was a massive hidden trust fund just waiting for his signature. Brad approached the polished mahogany reception desk and confidently asked to speak with the senior branch manager. He did not ask for a regular teller. He believed his new status required top-tier executive service. The receptionist checked his name and politely escorted him to a private glass-enclosed corner office. The branch manager, a meticulous man named Mr. Roberts, had known our family for many years. He stood up, shook Brad's hand, and offered him a comfortable leather chair opposite his wide oak desk. Brad sat down, crossed his legs, and placed the county tax bills directly onto the desk. He smiled the relaxed, entitled smile of a man who believed the world owed him a favor. Brad casually explained that he needed to make a substantial withdrawal from his father's estate accounts. He spoke with an air of complete authority, telling Mr. Roberts that he was taking over the financial management of the household and needed to clear a few minor tax expenses before the weekend. He expected the manager to simply nod, print out a cashier's check, and congratulate him on his new role as the patriarch. Mr. Roberts maintained a perfectly neutral, professional expression. He picked up the tax bills, glanced at the exorbitant totals, and set them back down. He politely asked Brad for his official state identification to access the secure banking system. Brad confidently slid his driver's license across the desk. He sat back and comfortably waited, already imagining how pleased Jessica would be when he returned home with a fully funded bank account. He even considered asking for an additional $20,000 to cover Todd's living expenses and perhaps fund a luxury vacation. Mr. Roberts typed rapidly on his computer keyboard. He navigated through the secure banking portals, pulling up the extensive financial history of our family. Suddenly, the clicking of the keyboard stopped. A long, heavy silence filled the air-conditioned office. Mr. Roberts frowned slightly and leaned closer to his monitor. He clicked his mouse a few more times, verifying the information on the screen. He then looked up at Brad. His professional neutrality was gone, replaced by a look of profound confusion and deep pity. Mr. Roberts folded his hands on the desk and cleared his throat. He looked Brad directly in the eye and delivered a reality check that would completely shatter my son's arrogant delusion. "I am very sorry, Brad." Mr. Roberts said, his voice completely calm and strictly professional. "But I cannot authorize any withdrawals for you today. In fact, I cannot access any funds for you at all. Your name is not listed on any of the liquid asset accounts." Brad froze. His relaxed posture instantly vanished. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, all his heart pounding against his ribs. He asked Mr. Roberts what he meant. He loudly insisted that his father had left behind a massive estate, and as the son who inherited the family home, he was legally entitled to the family money. He demanded the manager look harder. Mr. Roberts turned his computer monitor slightly, so Brad could see the stark, empty screens. "The estate cleared probate 3 days ago," Mr. Roberts explained patiently, "and your mother was the sole legal beneficiary of all liquid assets. Immediately upon clearance, Helen withdrew the entire $2.8 million inheritance. She closed the investment portfolios, emptied the cash reserves, and transferred every single penny to a private wealth management institution. Our bank no longer holds any of her assets. The vault is completely empty, Brad. You have absolutely zero access to any funds." The words hit Brad like a physical blow to the chest. $2.8 million. He had absolutely no idea the estate was that massive. For years, he and Jessica had treated me like a nuisance, firmly believing the physical house was the only thing of true value. They had completely underestimated my financial power. Brad sat in the leather chair, completely paralyzed by shock and mounting terror. He stared blindly at the tax bills resting on the desk. He realized with horrifying clarity exactly what I had done. I had not just given them a house, I had handed them a massive, unfunded liability. I had deliberately transferred the heavy burden of a luxury estate onto their shoulders, while systematically stripping away the financial safety net required to keep it standing. Brad slowly stood up his legs, feeling like lead. He did not say goodbye to Mr. Roberts. He stumbled out of the private office, walked across the marble lobby, and pushed his way out through the glass doors. The bright downtown sun blinded him. He leaned against the concrete wall of the parking garage, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack set in. He realized they were completely and utterly house-poor. They owned a magnificent $1.2 million castle, but they did not have a single dollar to defend it. The property taxes were due. The insurance premiums were looming. The homeowners association late fees were compounding daily. The house was not a prize. It was a perfectly executed financial trap, and by kicking me out, they had eagerly locked themselves inside it. The first of the month had come and gone, and the financial reality of the house was a noose tightening around Brad and Jessica's necks. They were drowning in utility bills, property taxes, and the suffocating silence of a bank account that had absolutely nothing left in it. Todd, the brother who had brought absolutely nothing to the table, decided he was going to be the savior of the household. He paced around the kitchen, fueled by cheap energy drinks and a delusional sense of entrepreneurial spirit. He did not have a job, and he did not have any savings, but he did have a pressure washer. He had borrowed from a friend, and a collection of rags he had raided from the hall closet. He walked out to the pristine, manicured driveway. The same driveway that had once been the envy of the entire street, and looked at it with a predatory glimmer in his eyes. He decided to turn the family estate into an unlicensed, high-volume auto detailing shop. He did not ask the neighbors, and he certainly did not check the local zoning laws. He just started putting flyers on windshields at the local grocery store. By Wednesday morning, the quiet, prestigious neighborhood was filled with the rhythmic, aggressive sound of a pressure washer and the smell of harsh, industrial-grade soaps. Todd was washing cars in the driveway, completely unbothered by the fact that he was breaking every rule in the neighborhood covenant. The driveway, once a masterpiece of landscape design, began to decay rapidly. The chemical runoff from his industrial soaps did not just disappear into the drain. It pooled in the cracks of the stone and seeped directly into the lush, prize-winning lawn. It created ugly, yellowish patches where the grass began to die. Todd did not care. He was too busy blasting the finish off his customers' sedans and leaving streaks of grime across their windshields. He started inviting his friends over to hang out while he worked. They left their own beat-up, rusted cars parked right on the manicured grass. They blasted loud, bass, heavy music, smoked cigarettes in the front yard, and made the whole property look like a salvage yard in the middle of a high-end gated community. The neighbors were furious. The quiet, peaceful atmosphere that had once defined this street was completely shattered. They did not stand for it. They reported the activity to the homeowners association immediately. The board did not mess around. They were a group of retired attorneys and business executives who took property values and community aesthetics very seriously. They did not just send a warning letter, they sent a task force. One Tuesday afternoon, just as Todd was dumping a bucket of soapy water directly into the street gutters, a black sedan pulled up the driveway. Two board members stepped out, their faces stern and uncompromising. They were carrying a thick, formal envelope. They did not wait for Jessica to finish her coffee. They marched right up to the front door and demanded to speak with the homeowners. Jessica and Brad came out looking frazzled and embarrassed as the entire street watched from their windows. The board president did not waste time on pleasantries. He handed them a cease and desist order signed and stamped demanding the immediate termination of all business activities on the property. Then he delivered the final blow. He informed them that because the business was unlicensed, the damage to the landscaping was significant, and the neighborhood covenants had been blatantly violated. They were being issued a fine. The amount was $5,000. $5,000. Jessica stared at the paper in her hands, her face going from pale to a deep, dangerous shade of crimson. That fine was more than they had left in their combined checking accounts. It was a staggering amount of money, and it was due within 48 hours. The board members did not wait for an argument. They turned around, got back in their car, and drove away, leaving Brad and Jessica standing in the middle of their driveway, surrounded by half-washed cars, chemical puddles, and the lingering stares of their angry neighbors. Todd, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, just shrugged his shoulders and asked if they could lend him $100 for more cleaning supplies. Jessica almost screamed. She slapped the paper against Brad's chest and stormed back into the house, her heels clicking aggressively against the tile. She grabbed her phone and tried to call me. She needed a bailout, and she needed it immediately. She dialed my number with trembling fingers, expecting me to pick up and offer to pay the fine to protect the family reputation. But the call did not go through. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again. Each time she was met with the same cold, automated silence. She did not realize that I had blocked them. She assumed I was just ignoring her, and it made her blood boil. She paced around the house, looking at the piles of bills that were stacking up on the kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. The fine, the taxes, the insurance, it was all too much. She decided she was not going to wait for me to pick up the phone. She knew my routine. She knew I spent my Tuesday afternoons at the local community center volunteering with the garden club. She figured if she could track me down in public in front of all my friends and social peers, I would be forced to play the part of the doting, generous grandmother. She would force my hand. She would make a scene, she would play the victim, and she would humiliate me into writing a check for that $5,000 fine. She grabbed her purse, shoved her keys into her hand, and stormed out the door, determined to hunt me down and force me to fix her catastrophic mess. She did not realize that she was walking directly into the next stage of her undoing. Sunday mornings at St. Jude Parish were always a sanctuary of peace and fellowship. The fellowship hall was a warm space, filled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. I sat at a large round table surrounded by women I had known for decades. The soft murmur of polite conversation created a comforting rhythm. I was wearing my favorite floral dress, sipping a cup of Earl Grey tea, and feeling completely at peace in my new life. Then the heavy wooden doors of the fellowship hall swung open with a violent crash. The loud noise instantly silenced the room. Every head turned toward the entrance. Jessica stood in the doorway, her hair intentionally disheveled and her makeup carefully smudged to create the perfect illusion of distress. She marched across the room, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. She did not care that she was interrupting a private event. She had an audience, and she was ready to deliver a performance. Jessica reached my table and immediately burst into loud, dramatic tears. Her sobbing echoed off the high ceilings of the hall. "How could you do this to us? How can you sit here drinking tea while your own flesh and blood is drowning?" The entire hall went completely silent. My friends lowered their cups, staring at Jessica in utter shock. Jessica fell to her knees next to my chair, clutching her hands to her chest. She sobbed louder, ensuring every person in the room could hear her tragic narrative. "You abandoned us," Jessica wailed, looking frantically at the faces of my friends. "You left us with nothing. Brad is your son, and you are letting him starve. We are drowning in debt, and you completely cut us off without warning. We are going to lose the house. Please, Helen, please come home and help us." The congregation gasped softly. A few older women looked at me with deep concern, their brows furrowed in confusion. Jessica was painting me as a monster, a cruel mother who had ruthlessly discarded her own child to suffer in poverty. She expected me to crumble under the heavy weight of public shame. She thought I would desperately try to calm her down and promise to pay the exorbitant fines to keep the peace. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defensive explanation. I simply placed my teacup down onto the saucer. The porcelain made a soft, calm click. I looked down at Jessica, who was still kneeling on the floor and squeezing out fake tears. Her eyes darted around the room, soaking up the attention she so desperately craved. I reached down and picked up my leather purse from the chair beside me. I unzipped the main compartment. I always came prepared. I had spent 40 years as an accountant, and I never walked into a situation without proper documentation. I reached inside and pulled out a crisp white piece of paper. It was a high-resolution printed screenshot of the exact text message Jessica had sent me on the day she kicked me out. The words were printed in bold black ink, completely undeniable. I did not hand the paper to Jessica. Instead, I handed it to Martha, the head of the parish council, who was sitting directly to my right. Martha adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the paper. I watched her eyes scan the harsh, aggressive words. The colour instantly drained from Martha's face. Her expression of concern for Jessica morphed into a look of absolute disgust. Martha silently passed the paper to the woman next to her. Within moments, the printed screenshot was making its way around the entire table. The women read the vile text message. "Leave us. We want you out of this house today." There was no misinterpreting those words. There was no taking them out of context. The physical evidence completely shattered Jessica's fragile illusion of victimhood. The women at the table looked down at the sobbing girl on the floor, their eyes hardening with profound judgment. The whispers began to ripple through the fellowship hall, completely turning the tide against my daughter-in-law. I looked down at Jessica. The fake tears had stopped. She noticed the sudden shift in the room. She noticed the cold, hostile stares radiating from the women she had tried to manipulate. She slowly stood up, her face flushing a deep, panicked red. She looked at the piece of paper circulating the table and realized exactly what I had done. "You prayed for my absence, Jessica," I said. My voice was clear and firm, carrying across the silent hall so every single person could hear me perfectly. God answered. The words struck her like a physical blow. The absolute finality in my tone left no room for argument. She had demanded that I leave, and I had obliged. The congregation now knew the absolute truth. They saw her not as a desperate victim, but as a cruel, manipulative bully who had cast out a grieving widow and was now begging for cash. The social isolation was instantaneous and complete. Nobody rushed to comfort her. Nobody offered her a tissue. The women of St. Jude Parish simply stared at her with icy condemnation. Jessica took a step back, completely overwhelmed by the crushing weight of her public humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The arrogant confidence she had walked in with was entirely destroyed. She spun around on her heels and ran toward the exit. She practically shoved the heavy wooden doors open, fleeing blindly out into the bright, beautiful Sunday morning. I calmly reached my hand out, retrieved the piece of paper from Martha, and gently placed it back into my leather purse. I picked up my delicate porcelain teacup, took a slow sip of my Earl Grey tea, and resumed my peaceful morning. The walls of the $1.2 million estate were rapidly closing in on Brad and Jessica. The crushing weight of their financial reality was no longer just a looming, distant threat. It was an absolute daily nightmare. Drowning in massive property tax debt, compounding homeowner association fines, and the profound social shame of being exposed as frauds in front of the entire parish, the house had transformed into a beautiful, suffocating prison. Todd had abandoned them completely, leaving his chemical stains on the driveway, and vanishing into the night, the moment he realized there was no free money left to steal. Jessica could no longer show her face at the local grocery store without feeling the burning, judgmental stares of our neighbors. The utilities were severely past due, and the threat of the power being shut off was a constant daily terror. Jessica finally broke under the immense pressure. She paced the kitchen floor furiously, demanding that Brad sell the property immediately. She convinced herself this was a strategic victory rather than a humiliating retreat. She looked at the luxurious fixtures and the expansive square footage and firmly believed they were sitting on a massive gold mine. The house was valued at over $1 million. Jessica eagerly calculated that if they sold the property, they could easily pay off the minor tax debts, escape the oppressive neighborhood, and walk away with a huge cash payout from the equity. She envisioned them buying a sleek modern condo downtown and a brand new luxury vehicle, finally living the wealthy lifestyle she felt she inherently deserved. Brad readily agreed, desperate to escape the relentless financial anxiety that kept him awake every night. They hired a prominent local real estate agent, signing the listing agreement with eager, trembling hands. Because the house was located in a highly prestigious neighborhood and boasted premium custom upgrades, it attracted wealthy buyers almost instantly. Within 2 short weeks, they received a highly competitive cash offer that matched their asking price perfectly. Jessica was absolutely ecstatic. She spent her evenings aggressively browsing online catalogs for expensive modern furniture and planning lavish tropical vacations to celebrate their impending payday. She completely ignored the mounting past due notices piled high on the kitchen counter, secure in her arrogant assumption that the closing day would magically wash away all their problems. The escrow process began smoothly and the final closing date was set. They began packing their belongings into cardboard boxes, practically tasting the massive check they firmly believed was coming their way. But the absolute reality of real estate law is utterly unforgiving. And I had prepared for this exact scenario long before I ever handed them the deed to the property. Exactly 1 week before the scheduled closing, Brad was sitting in the living room taping up a box when his cell phone rang loudly. It was their real estate agent. Brad answered the phone with a relaxed, confident smile, fully expecting to hear a minor update about the final walkthrough. Instead, the agent sounded frantic and deeply apologetic. The title company had just completed their mandatory public records search on the property, and they had hit a massive, insurmountable roadblock. The sale was entirely frozen. The title was not clean. The escrow officer had discovered a massive legal encumbrance recorded directly against the deed of the house. It was a formal mechanical lien, a legally binding claim for unpaid debts, and the total amount demanded was exactly $250,000. Brad felt the room spin violently around him. He dropped the heavy roll of packing tape onto the hardwood floor. He gripped the phone tightly, his knuckles turning white, and desperately asked the agent to explain what was happening. He insisted there had to be some kind of clerical mistake. He proudly stated that they owned the luxury house free and clear, and there was absolutely no mortgage on the property. The real estate agent let out a heavy sigh and explained that this was not a traditional bank mortgage. The public records showed that the lien was held by a private party. The agent read the name of the lien holder aloud over the phone. The name was Helen. Jessica heard the pure panic in Brad's voice and rushed into the living room, her face pale with sudden fear. Brad put the phone on speaker, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He could not comprehend how I could possibly have a legal claim on a house I had willingly given away. He hung up the phone and immediately dialed my number, his chest heaving with severe panic. As usual, the call went straight to my secure voicemail. I was sitting comfortably on my sun-drenched balcony, quietly reading a novel, when my legal representative Thomas sent the notification directly to Brad's email inbox. Thomas always executed my instructions with flawless legal precision. Brad opened the email on his phone, his eyes scanning the harsh legal documents attached. It was a formal notification of the lien, accompanied by a pristine, unarguable paper trail. 2 years ago, when Brad and Jessica were planning their incredibly lavish wedding, they begged me for financial assistance. I paid over $100,000 for the premium catering, the exclusive venue, and the custom designer dress. Shortly after the wedding, they demanded a complete luxury renovation of the upstairs living quarters, which cost an additional $150,000. At the time, I had made Brad sign a formal promissory note, legally categorizing the massive funds not as a gift, but as a secured loan against the value of the estate. Because I loved my son, I had never enforced the monthly repayments. But the exact moment Jessica screamed at me to leave my own home, I had instructed Thomas to officially record that promissory note with the county clerk. The legal trap was now completely sprung. Brad and Jessica stared at the email in absolute horror. The law was crystal clear. They could not legally transfer the title of the house to the new buyers without satisfying the lien first. That meant $250,000 would be immediately deducted from the proceeds of the sale and deposited directly into my private trust account. Furthermore, after deducting the hefty real estate agent commissions, the massive back taxes, the homeowner association fines, and the closing costs, there would be absolutely zero profit left for them. Jessica snatched the phone from Brad, her eyes darting across the bright screen. She read the legal terminology over and over, desperately trying to find a loophole that did not exist. The realization hit her with the brutal force of a freight train. She screamed in pure agonizing frustration, throwing the expensive phone across the room, where it shattered against the beautiful brick fireplace. She fell to her knees among the half-packed cardboard boxes, sobbing uncontrollably. The luxurious future she had arrogantly planned had instantly evaporated into thin air. They were not going to walk away as millionaires. They were not going to buy a luxury condo. They were completely and utterly trapped. They had eagerly tried to steal my wealth, and in return, I had securely chained them to a sinking ship with absolutely no possible way to escape. The crushing reality of the frozen house sale left Brad and Jessica completely paralyzed in a state of absolute terror. Their grand dreams of escaping the financial black hole and walking away as millionaires were entirely destroyed. To make matters infinitely worse, Todd returned to the property. He had slept in his rusted car for a few days before crawling back to the luxury estate, begging his sister for a warm place to stay. Jessica was far too mentally exhausted to fight him anymore. She allowed him to sleep on the expensive leather sofa in the finished basement. But the house itself was beginning to violently rebel against its arrogant new owners. A minor leak developed in the exposed plumbing of the basement utility room. It was a very simple fix, and something a licensed professional plumber could have easily resolved in an hour for a few $100s. But Brad and Jessica did not have a single dollar left to spare. Every credit card they owned was completely maxed out, and their bank accounts were entirely overdrawn. They were surviving on cheap boxed pasta and tap water. The dripping pipe was slowly damaging the custom drywall, and Brad panicked. He told Jessica they needed to call a professional before the water reached the expensive plush carpet. Jessica completely refused to spend money they did not have. She looked at her unemployed brother sitting lazily on the couch and demanded he make himself useful for once in his miserable life. She told Todd to go down to the utility room and fix the pipe himself. She arrogantly assumed plumbing was nothing more than turning a few metal wrenches and applying some waterproof tape. Todd did not know the absolute first thing about residential plumbing systems. He walked down the carpeted basement stairs, carrying a heavy steel pipe wrench he found discarded in the garage. He did not bother to locate the main water shutoff valve for the house. He did not watch a tutorial video or consult a basic manual. He simply walked up to the highly pressurized copper pipe and clamped the heavy steel teeth of the wrench directly onto the delicate rusted joint. He pulled downward with all his body weight. The metal pipe did not just bend under the immense pressure, it violently and catastrophically shattered. The loud crack echoed through the massive house like a gunshot. A split second later, a massive continuous torrent of freezing city water exploded from the broken main valve. The sheer incredible force of the water knocked Todd completely off his feet and sent him crashing hard into the drywall. He scrambled in the dark, slipping repeatedly on the rapidly flooding floor as he desperately tried to stop the endless geyser of water with his bare hands. It was completely useless. By the time Brad heard the loud commotion and frantically ran outside to the street to manually shut off the city water main with a specialized tool, the damage was completely devastating. Thousands of gallons of water had poured directly into the massive, finished basement. The expensive imported carpet was entirely submerged under a foot of murky brown water. The custom drywall was rapidly disintegrating, and the heavy standing water was aggressively seeping directly into the deep concrete foundation of the estate. Jessica stood at the top of the basement stairs, looking down at the dark, freezing swimming pool that used to be her luxury entertainment room. She did not yell at Todd because she was completely numb with pure shock. She waded through the heavy mental fog and immediately grabbed her cell phone. She called the premium homeowner insurance company, which was the exact same policy she had desperately scrambled to reinstate after I had cancelled all of the automatic payments. She formally filed an emergency claim for catastrophic water damage, fully expecting a massive immediate payout to fix the ruined basement. The insurance company dispatched a senior claims adjuster the very next morning. He was a stern, meticulous man, carrying a digital tablet and a high-powered commercial flashlight. He put on heavy rubber boots and waded slowly down into the flooded basement. Brad and Jessica stood nervously in the kitchen, silently praying for the man to write them a massive check and save them from absolute ruin. The adjuster spent nearly 2 hours inspecting the shattered copper pipe, taking hundreds of high-resolution photographs and thoroughly documenting the surrounding waterline. He walked back upstairs, his heavy boots leaving muddy, wet tracks across the expensive hardwood floor. He did not look sympathetic in the slightest as he approached the kitchen island. The adjuster wiped his boots and looked directly at Brad and Jessica. He informed them that the estimated cost to repair the shattered plumbing, replace the ruined drywall, professionally extract the standing water, and structurally stabilize the compromised concrete foundation was roughly $80,000. Jessica let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, assuming the premium insurance policy would cover the entire massive bill without any questions. Her deep relief lasted exactly 2 seconds. The adjuster tapped the screen of his digital tablet and formally denied the entire claim right on the spot. He coldly and methodically explained that the insurance policy specifically excluded catastrophic damage caused by illegal, unpermitted tampering. He pointed out the deep, aggressive gouge marks from the heavy steel wrench Todd had used, and stated that because a licensed professional did not perform the repair work, the entire $80,000 liability fell squarely on their shoulders. He handed them the formal denial paperwork and walked straight out the front door without another word. The luxury estate was now completely unlivable. Within a week, toxic black mold began creeping rapidly up the basement walls. The entire house smelled of sour rot and stagnant water. They had absolutely no money to fix the massive damage, and no legal way to sell the house due to my mechanical lien. In a final pathetic act of absolute delusion, Jessica refused to accept any responsibility for her actions. She searched the internet and found a sleazy, aggressive attorney who worked strictly on a contingency basis. She eagerly signed a contract to sue me directly. She formally filed a ridiculous, desperate lawsuit, claiming I had maliciously and fraudulently tricked them into accepting a condemned property. She firmly believed she could use the legal system to force me to pay for the catastrophic disaster she had entirely caused. The sterile conference room inside the towering downtown courthouse was unnervingly quiet. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady rhythm against the heavy, soundproof glass windows. I sat perfectly upright in a comfortable ergonomic chair wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a string of elegant pearls. My legal representative, Thomas, sat calmly beside me with a thick, pristine leather binder resting on the polished mahogany table. Across from us sat the complete and utter wreckage of my son and his wife. Brad looked absolutely haggard. Dark purple circles hung heavily under his bloodshot eyes, and his clothes hung loosely on his shrinking frame. He stared blankly at the wood grain of the table, completely defeated by the massive, crushing weight of his failures. But Jessica was a completely different story. Despite living in a mold-infested, ruined basement, she somehow managed to project an aura of supreme, arrogant confidence. She sat with her arms tightly crossed, wearing an overly aggressive red blouse and a deeply smug smirk on her face. Next to her sat her contingency attorney, a sleazy, loud man named Mr. Peterson. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting suit and reeked of stale coffee and unearned confidence. Mr. Peterson slammed his hands loudly on the table and immediately launched into a ridiculous theatrical monologue. He aggressively accused me of intentional fraud and malicious deception. He boldly claimed that I had knowingly abandoned a structurally compromised property to trap a young, innocent family in massive debt. He handed Thomas a list of absurd legal demands. Jessica sat back in her chair and practically beamed with arrogant pride. She firmly believed she was finally going to force me to surrender. Mr. Peterson loudly demanded that I pay the entire $80,000 repair bill for the catastrophic water damage Todd had caused. He demanded that I completely erase the legally recorded $250,000 mechanical lien against the property. And finally, in a display of pure, unadulterated greed, he demanded that I hand over 1/3 of my $2.8 million liquid inheritance to compensate them for their extreme emotional distress. Jessica looked directly across the table at me and offered a cruel, vindictive little smile. She thought she had me completely cornered. She thought the threat of a long public lawsuit would frighten me into writing a massive settlement check. I did not react to her smug smile. I simply picked up my tall glass of iced water and took a slow, refreshing sip. Thomas did not even bother to look angry at the absurd accusations. He simply adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and opened the thick leather binder resting in front of him. He did not raise his voice or engage in theatrical shouting. He let the absolute crushing weight of undisputed legal documentation do all the heavy lifting. Thomas pulled out the first document and slid it smoothly across the mahogany table toward Mr. Peterson. It was the legally binding quitclaim deed. Thomas calmly pointed out the signature at the bottom of the page, clearly notarized and legally recorded. He explained that Brad accepted the property entirely as is and willingly assumed all legal and financial responsibility. Mr. Peterson frowned slightly and picked up the paper. Next, Thomas pulled out the extensive financial records regarding the cancelled insurance policies. He provided certified bank statements proving that I had legally terminated my financial obligations to the property the exact same day I moved out. He clearly stated that I had absolutely no legal duty to maintain an insurance policy on a house I no longer owned. Thomas then delivered the most devastating piece of evidence. He pulled out a high-resolution printed photograph. It was the exact same time-stamped text message I had shown my friends at the parish brunch. The message from Jessica, clearly stating, "Leave us. We want you out of this house today." Thomas looked directly at Mr. Peterson and explained that there was absolutely no fraudulent abandonment. I was aggressively evicted from the premises by his own client, and I merely complied with her hostile demands. Finally, Thomas presented the original, heavily documented promissory notes, detailing the exact amount of money I had loaned them. Mr. Peterson stared down at the flawless, pristine mountain of paper trail evidence. He was a sleazy lawyer, but he was not completely stupid. He worked entirely on a contingency basis, which meant he only got paid if he secured a massive settlement. It took him less than 30 seconds to read the room and realize he had been completely played by his own clients. Jessica had lied to him. She had painted herself as an innocent victim of a wealthy, cruel mother-in-law. Instead, she had willingly signed her own financial death warrant and left an absolute trail of aggressive evidence behind her. The legal trap was completely airtight, and there was absolutely zero chance of winning a single dollar from me. The arrogant bluster completely vanished from his face. He abruptly stood up from his chair and aggressively shoved the papers back across the table. He did not bother to soften the blow. He looked down at Jessica with a look of pure, unmasked disgust. He loudly informed her that she had no legal case whatsoever, and that she was completely out of her mind if she thought any judge would entertain this absolute garbage. He formally withdrew as their legal counsel right on the spot. He slammed his briefcase shut, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the sterile conference room, leaving the heavy door to slowly click shut behind him. Jessica sat, frozen in her chair, completely unable to process the total sudden collapse of her entire world. The smug, arrogant smirk vanished from her face, instantly replaced by sheer, raw panic. She realized she was not getting a massive settlement. She was not getting the lien removed. She was going back to a rotting, mold-infested house, completely drowning in massive debt. Jessica suffered a complete and total emotional meltdown right there in the conference room. She turned her absolute fury onto Brad. She screamed at him at the top of her lungs, viciously calling him completely useless and pathetic for allowing this to happen. She sobbed and wailed, throwing her hands in the air. Brad just buried his face in his hands, weeping silently under the crushing weight of his ruined life. I did not intervene. I did not offer any comfort. I simply sat, perfectly still, in my comfortable chair, raised my cold glass of water to my lips, and took another deeply satisfying sip while I watched the absolute destruction of their toxic entitlement. 6 months slowly passed, and the brutal, unyielding wheels of financial ruin finally crushed whatever pathetic facade was left of my son and his toxic wife. The magnificent $1.2 million estate, the beautiful luxury house my late husband and I built with our bare hands and years of hard work, was completely and utterly unrecognizable. The toxic black mold from the shattered basement plumbing had not just stained the drywall. It had aggressively crawled up the interior studs and deeply infected the entire central ventilation system. The heavy, nauseating stench of water damage and decay was so incredibly overpowering that the neighbors frequently complained to the city. Brad and Jessica had absolutely no money to fix the massive structural devastation, and they certainly had no money to pay the staggering compounding property taxes or the massive homeowner association fines. The bank inevitably and aggressively stepped in. They issued a formal notice of default and began the cold, brutal legal process of absolute foreclosure. Shortly after, the county health inspector arrived and formally condemned the property due to the severe biological hazards. Brad and Jessica were legally ordered by the city to vacate the premises immediately. They did not leave the neighborhood as the wealthy, triumphant homeowners they had arrogantly pretended to be. They left in utter disgrace, carrying nothing but cheap black trash bags filled with their damp, ruined clothes. Their toxic, shallow marriage completely collapsed under the crushing, suffocating weight of their mutual, absolute bankruptcy. Jessica filed for a vicious contested divorce the exact same week they were formally evicted from the rotting house. She bitterly and publicly blamed Brad for the entire financial catastrophe, completely refusing to accept her own massive role in their total downfall. They moved into separate, incredibly cheap, cramped apartments downtown, completely drowning in massive, insurmountable debt and heavy legal fees. Todd, the arrogant, useless brother who had initiated the final catastrophic plumbing disaster, was swiftly and violently kicked to the curb. Without my massive, luxurious estate to comfortably leech off of, he was forced to frantically pack his meager, dirty belongings into his rusted, leaking vehicle. He now permanently sleeps in the cold back seat of his car, parked illegally in a desolate, abandoned strip mall parking lot, completely ignored by the sister who once championed him. Far away from their miserable, self-inflicted destruction, I woke up to the gentle, beautiful sound of local songbirds singing outside my window. I stepped out onto the wide, sun-drenched private balcony of my pristine luxury condo. The morning air was crisp, clean, and incredibly peaceful. I wore a plush, heavy white cotton robe and carried a steaming porcelain cup of freshly brewed premium dark roast coffee. I sat down in my comfortable cushioned outdoor chair, resting my feet, and opened my sleek silver laptop on the glass patio table. I logged securely into my private wealth management portal using my secure credentials. The high-resolution screen illuminated with a beautiful rising display of my pristine financial portfolio. The green numbers were steadily and aggressively climbing upward. The massive $2.8 million liquid inheritance I had quietly and intelligently secured was generating a massive stream of passive income every single month. I had absolutely no massive property taxes to pay to the county. I had no exorbitant, unexpected utility bills to cover for ungrateful, entitled children. Every single dollar in those accounts belonged entirely and exclusively to me to use exactly as I saw fit. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my hot coffee and purposefully navigated to a highly exclusive luxury travel website. I had spent 40 long years working hard, managing tight budgets and raising a family. I had spent the last 2 painful years being treated like a despised, annoying nuisance in my own home. It was finally time to properly and extravagantly reward myself for a lifetime of patience. I clicked through the vibrant digital brochures displaying crystal blue waters and selected a massive month-long luxury cruise across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. I did not bother to look for budget-friendly options or seasonal discounts. I confidently booked the absolute premier first-class penthouse suite on the massive ship, complete with a private ocean view balcony, a dedicated personal concierge, and exclusive VIP dining privileges. I entered my pristine platinum credit card information and firmly clicked the confirm button. The detailed luxury itinerary instantly popped up on my bright screen, promising endless weeks of beautiful golden sunsets, rich historical cultural tours, and absolute total uninterrupted relaxation. I leaned back comfortably in my cushioned chair and looked out over the beautiful, incredibly quiet, manicured landscape of my exclusive community. I felt absolutely no guilt weighing on my shoulders. I did not miss the large brick house with its endless, stressful maintenance, and I certainly did not miss the constant, draining, toxic anxiety of living with people who actively and openly despised my daily presence. The deeply ingrained generational cycle of being completely taken for granted was permanently and utterly broken. For years, I had silently and dutifully absorbed their gross disrespect, because I foolishly believed that was exactly what a good, supportive mother was supposed to do. I falsely believed I had to endlessly provide massive financial bailouts to somehow earn their basic love and respect. But Jessica had actually done me the absolute greatest favor of my entire adult life. When she stood in my beautiful kitchen and aggressively screamed at me to pack my bags and leave my own home, she unwittingly handed me the golden key to my ultimate personal liberation. She arrogantly and stupidly thought she was pushing a weak, subservient old woman out of her way so she could effortlessly claim a massive generational fortune. She had absolutely no idea she was aggressively demanding the permanent removal of the only structural pillar keeping her entire pathetic, fragile life from violently collapsing into dust. I gave them exactly what they relentlessly and cruelly asked for. I gave them the massive house. I gave them the heavy legal title. I gave them total, absolute control over their own lives. And above all else, I gave them my absolute, permanent, unbroken absence. They wanted a life entirely without me, and I happily obliged. And in the very end, getting exactly what they demanded cost them absolutely everything they had. I securely closed my silver laptop, set my warm coffee cup down on the smooth glass table, and smiled a genuine, deeply peaceful smile. The morning sun was incredibly bright and beautifully warm against my face, and the rest of my quiet, wealthy life was finally entirely mine.